I want to just take a moment to discuss the decision that was made by the Supreme Court on Friday. We have 3 women here on the council who feel very strongly about the impact that that has made, and the men on the council feel as strongly as we do, but they have graciously allowed us to speak tonight. So I'm going to start and just say, and I wrote this down, I'm sorry for reading it, but the courts and politicians have no place in private medical decisions that belong between a pregnant woman, their family, their beliefs, and their healthcare provider. It's difficult to describe to you how crushing it feels to witness the criminalization of a woman's right to choose. And I look at who this ruling affects versus who the decision makers are, and it's hard for me to process the dramatic difference between the two. Of the 5 Supreme Court justices who voted to make choice illegal for women, 80% were men. Representation is about acting or serving on behalf of or in place of someone. Of the 6 states that have now made it illegal for a woman to choose to have an abortion, 66% of those governors were men. Who did they represent? Because taking a woman's choice to have an abortion primarily affects young, impoverished Black women. 68% of Black Americans support choice. 74% of young Americans support choice. 63% of women support choice. In fact, 61% of the entire country supports choice. So for me, this is a strong lesson in the value of representation, and I hope a wake-up call for all the individuals who do not feel represented, for them to become involved in government, exercise their right to vote, and to get a seat at the decision-making table. With that, I'm going to pass this over to council members on.
Of what was to come. It was still such a shock when we got the news last week, and it feels like we've gone back 50 years in terms of my daughter's generation, future generations are going to have less rights as women than we did, and it's hard to even put those feelings into words, and yet I think as local electeds, even though that was a federal decision, don't think we can turn away from the fact that this impacts every person in our community, whether they are women or not. And since we've gotten that news, as I've engaged with the community, what I've heard clearly is the sense of hopelessness, anger, and frustration from our community that feels like actually so many have lived experience with abortion for any number of reasons that are their own personal choice to make, and just how difficult those decisions are and not to be taken lightly. So that ability to have body autonomy and being able to make your own choices about your own body is key to our very humanity and our very freedoms. So this decision is not going to prevent abortions. Instead, it will make it much more challenging and difficult for women that don't have the financial means to be able to have access to safe abortion as part of healthcare. And really, that access to healthcare is the very human right and dignity that we should have available for all peoples versus those that live in a state like Washington, where we recognize that our bodies and our choices matter. And yet I worry about all the states where the women don't have those rights. And I also heard from many in the community about their very concern about what this might foretell for other rights that may be taken away. And, you know, yet this last weekend was Pride weekend. And I think very much about our LGBTQ plus community members and how frustrated and scared they must be right now to think that their very identities and freedoms are at risk, and how we as a city council support our community during this time. So I don't have any answers, just feeling like we need to not be quiet. Thank you.
Councilmember Robertson.
Thanks. I appreciate and agree wholeheartedly with Mayor Robinson and Councilmember Zahn on this. My first foray into politics was as a volunteer for the National Abortion Rights Action League when I was in college. And then when I was in law school, I worked on the Initiative 120 campaign in 1991, which codified Roe versus Wade in Washington. And I didn't stop working even at that point, because at that point, the Roe versus Wade was just, it was one decision. And I remember after Initiative 120 passed in 1991 in Washington, when the Casey decision came out in 1992, I was still in law school at the end of my second year. And I remember taking a big sigh of relief, thinking, okay, now this is codified. I mean, not codified, but now this is locked down. The precedent's there. The precedent of Roe is safe. And for the last, how many years? 30 years, I have thought the precedent of Roe is safe because of that Casey decision. And to have it flip has just been really devastating, I think, to all, everyone in America, but especially for women and girls and people without means to go to another state, for the states where it's become illegal. The court took what was a fundamental right and turned it into something that's a privilege if you live in a state where you still have that right. And things like that should not be decided by the states. That's a fundamental right. And what could be more fundamental than controlling your own body? Because if you don't have bodily autonomy, you can't have economic freedom, you can't have freedom to create the life that you want if you can't control your own body. So I feel really just devastated for the next generation, and my three daughters will, if they lived in a state other than Washington, will have fewer rights than I grew up with. And I find that very sad. I also think that this is going to lead to a lot more stratification, because people who have money to go to another state will continue to have the freedom to control their body and control whether they bear or beget children. And people who have no means will not. And so that is it's just really unfair, and just what a loss for our country. And as Councilmember Zahn said, this does not get, abortion before it was legal across the country still happened in states where it was illegal. It just was less safe. So what we're doing is we're making women and girls less safe by this decision, unless they have the privilege of living in a state like Washington. So, like I said, without bodily autonomy, we do not have life, and we do not have liberty, and we cannot pursue our happiness. So it's a real problem. And thank you for giving us the chance to speak about this. This hits very, very deeply. Like I said, it was the first foray into politics, was working on this issue at the local and state level. And it feels like a very dark day today. So, thanks.
Thank you.